to Wonderful. Now, we are taking some adventures this month to the incredible natural wonders of the world to learn how all of creation, including us, can worship God. Now, some of the adventures we might be taking, like hiking to Mount Everest, are going to leave you in a little bit of a situation where you're going to need to ask for some help. And asking God for help is what we're going to be focusing on today. So to help you understand what Mount Everest looks like and the kind of hike that it would take to get to the top, I have a little bit of a video and some pictures to show you of what Mount Everest looks like. Mount Everest, which is in the country of Nepal, is the highest and probably one of the most majestic mountains in the whole world. Now, people who climb Mount Everest spend months and sometimes even years getting ready to be able to survive the high altitude and the lack of oxygen. And we know that the higher we go, the colder it goes as well. So there are a lot of harsh conditions that they go through in order to get to the top. But even with the training and the best of the equipment, it's a very dangerous hike. And not everyone knows how to climb it. Many people who attempt to climb Mount Everest hire people called Sherpas. And these are experienced climbers who help to carry extra supplies and are experts in the mountain, and they can help in difficult weather, like if a big storm blows in. Now, without going with these, if you try and go without them, it's not really an expedition. Whether climbing Everest or trying to get through a really tough day at school, we all have those times that we need to ask for help. And sometimes God sends us help in the way of giving us other people. So, what's the hardest physical challenge that you've ever attempted? Probably haven't tried to climb Mount Everest, and if you have, please let me know. I myself have gone on a roller coaster called Expedition Everest at Animal Kingdom and Disney, and it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. It's a very scary roller coaster. But have you ever tried a physical challenge or activity, and maybe it was like running a race, like a 5K, a 10K, or maybe even a half marathon? Playing on a sports team, that's a huge physical challenge. Taking dance classes, maybe going for a race with your siblings, washing the dishes after a big family meal like Thanksgiving or Christmas, keeping up with your homework, doing your chores, getting to your classes on time, maybe learning a new instrument. What are some things that gave you some encouragement and some hope and helped you to keep going when things felt a little too hard? Will you let me know?
Oh, hello everybody. I'm Yeti, the explorer. Adventure is also calling my name. Yeti. Did you hear it? See, I told you it was calling my name. Now, last week I know you met my adventuring friend, Judah, as Judah told you about their trip to the Northern Lights. You see, things didn't quite go his way, but it reminded Judah of the big idea for the week, which was that we could worship by putting our hope in God. Now, you see, I also had quite the adventure recently. I took myself on a little expedition to the country of Nepal to climb Mount Everest. Now, I've always dreamt of climbing Mount Everest. It's the peak in this Himalayan mountain range. You see, it's said to be the highest mountain on earth. Wow. It's pretty awe-inspiring. Now, you see, I trained for this. I trained physically. I trained mentally. Brr. You see, it's cold up on the mountain. And then I packed my bag. I packed it full of my gear. Things I would need. I brought some games so I wouldn't get bored during the hike. I brought some snacks so I wouldn't get hungry. You see, it's very hard to hike a mountain with no snacks. Now, I had arrived at base camp. Now, base camp is the starting and the stopping point every time you want to climb to the Mount Everest to do your expedition. For me, it was where my adventure would begin that day. Now, you see, when it came my turn to put on my pack to go for my hike, I couldn't lift it. It was too heavy. So I did what had to be done. You see, I dumped out my pack, the snacks and the games, all the important things I needed. And it was a mess around me. It was extremely embarrassing. I clearly needed some help. But right there in the middle of all this mess, you see, my book fell out. The book I take on all of my adventures, all of my exploring, all of my expeditions. It was my Bible. And it happened to fall open to Psalm 80. Now you see, the Psalms, man, the songs were these songs that were written to express emotions and thoughts that people had to God. I started to read Psalm 80, and this is what I found. You brought us from Egypt like a grapevine. You drove away the pagan nations and transplanted us into your land. You cleared the ground for us, and we took root and we filled the land. Our shade covered the mountains. Our shade and branches covered the mighty cedars. We spread our branches out to the west, to the Mediterranean Sea, and our shoots spread east to the Euphrates River. But now why have you broken down our walls? In what I was reading, a man named Asaph was talking to God about this vine. And Asaph was thinking of the people of Israel. It was likely that his relatives were some of the first temple musicians, and they saw the promises of God happening before their eyes. In the verses we just read, the vine of Israel, that was the God's people, the Israelites. They were blessed and happy in the promised land. Their promises, the people, they had filled up this land, and Israel had grown strong and big, kind of like my Mount Everest, but in a completely different kind of way. But then something happened in verse 12, we're going to read again, where it says, "But now, why have you broken down our walls, so that all who are passing by may steal our fruit? The wild boar from the forest devours it, and the wild animals, they feed on it." Now in ancient Israel, a vineyard, or a large piece of land that grew the vines, was surrounded by a thorny hedge or a wall to protect it, to keep out the wild animals. Here we read that the walls surrounding the promised land have fallen. They've been taken down and the vine has been destroyed. Asaph looked at Israel's current trouble and saw that it seemed like this once great and powerful, this healthy and protected vine, it was no longer thriving or protected at all. Asaph was sad when he saw this, so he decided to pray, begging God to help Israel. And then we go to verse 14 and we say, "Come back, we beg you, O God of heaven's armies. Look down from heaven and see our plight. Take care of this grapevine that you yourself have planted, this son you have raised for yourself. For we are chopped up and burned by your enemies. May they perish at the sight of your frown. Strengthen the man you love, the son of your choice. Then we will never ever abandon you again. Revive us so we can call on your name once more. Turn us again to yourself, O Lord God of heaven's armies. May your face shine down upon us. Only then will we be saved." When things took a turn, and there seemed to be a different story happening for Israel, Asaph did his best to ask God why and to ask for help. Reading in Psalm 80 reminded me to stop and pray right then in the midst of my big mess, because if Asaph could look and see what was happening in the midst of the mess, and he asked God to help, he begged him, then in the midst of my mess, I could ask God for help too. I was watching all my friends leave for this climb, and I knew I needed to ask somebody for help, to help me repack my bag before I could get started my adventure, my exploration, my expedition. And as I put on the pack again, I whispered a quiet thank you to God, and I thought to myself, Asaph helped me to remember in the midst of our big messes, in the midst of the hopelessness, we can stop and pray to ask God for help. That I can worship by asking God for help. And at the top of that very mountain of Mount Everest, freezing my patootie off, I looked up at the night sky and I looked at the stars. There were so many. They were so bright. It was vast. It was beautiful. Creation was worshiping God. And I looked and I saw the big idea star. And the big idea star said to me that we can worship by asking for God's help. Can you say that with me, friends? We can worship by asking for God's help. My hat has fallen off. It is time for me to go. I will see you around. I'm going to go find my adventure friend Judah. Perhaps we can go together on an adventure. Goodbye.
Hey, welcome back. I found this rope while I was cleaning out one of the church closets, and it's really tangled up. Now, I could probably sit here and untangle it, but I might get a little frustrated, and it wouldn't be very easy, right? Now, climbing a mountain like Mount Everest requires a lot of supplies. Things like the right hiking boots and the right kind of snacks, and don't forget your very important ropes. But mine is all tangled up. Do you think I could ask someone to help me untangle it? Yeah, if I had a friend, I could go to them and ask for help. It's the same way that we talk to God. In fact, we have a couple of verses that are going to talk just like that. We're going to go back to the book of Hebrews, and we're going to chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us take off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We can do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in a place of honor beside God's throne. It's easy to get tangled up in things like worry or the things we know we shouldn't be doing, which is the sin. And sin is the stuff that separates us from God. Now, this passage reminds us to keep our eyes on Jesus, even in the darkest, hardest moments of our life. Jesus helps us to get going. And it reminds us of Jesus on the cross, that in those hardest and most difficult times for Jesus, he kept going because of his faith, because he believed in God and his plan. And I love that it reminds us that even in the worst and hardest and hopeless times, we keep going because Jesus knew the promise of the joy that was coming. So Jesus didn't get all tangled up like our rope, up tangled in worry. We have that same promise because of Jesus and how Jesus died for us. So we don't have to stay tangled up in sin and bad choices. All we have to do is ask God for help, and God will help us. Even during the darkest moments, we can remember that God will help us untangle whatever is holding us down. In fact, it reminds me of our big idea that we heard earlier from Yeti. We can worship God by asking for God's help. Will you do me a favor? Will you practice your worship with me right now in worship and praise and music? Let's go do that.
I'll serve you, Lord, forever. I'll serve you, Lord, forever. I'll do my best, I'll do my best. Oh, I'll do my best for you. Oh, oh, oh. I'll do my best, I'll do my best. Oh, I'll do my best. best. Oh, I'll do my best for you. I'll love, I'll serve, I'll praise you, Lord, forever. I'll love, I'll serve, I'll praise you, Lord, forever. I'll do my best, I'll do my best. Oh, I'll do my best for you. Oh, oh, oh. I'll do my best, I'll do my best. Oh, I'll do my best for you. Oh, oh, oh. I'll do my best, I'll do my best. Oh, I'll do my best for you. Oh, oh, oh. I'll do my best, I'll do my best. Oh, I'll do my best for you.
Now, since we're practicing how we can ask God for help, let's talk about asking for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness or that you're unable to do it on your own. It's actually a sign of courage and strength. Sometimes we get to be the helpers, and sometimes we are the ones that need help. I have some questions for you, and some of you might know the answers, and some of you might not know the answers. It's okay to ask for help. If you do know the answer, go ahead and tell me. And if you need to go to maybe a friend in your house or someone nearby, or sometimes I ask my little robot, that I'll say the name really quietly, Alexa. Yeah, or Google Home. Sometimes I ask them questions all the time if I need to know the answer quickly and I don't want to look it up. The goal of this game is not for one person to have the right answer, for you to get as many as possible, but it's to go and ask others for help. So be sure to go and ask each other. Ready? Okay. Here is your first question that you may or may not know the answer to. Ready? What day of the week is it? Okay, good. What month are we in? What is the color of your car? Okay, so those might be some answers we know. What are the names of the 8 planets in the solar system? If you don't know this one, it would be a good time to go ask somebody. How fast is the fastest land vehicle? We're going to have to look that one up. I'm going to have to look it up too. At what age does a duckling become a duck? I'm stumped. I don't even know. When does a puppy turn into a dog? When does a kitten turn into a cat? When do you change the name? How old does that have to be? Okay, what is a group of otters called? Do you know any of these answers? How many books in the Bible are there? How many churches did Paul write letters to? What are some ways that we can ask God for help? What are some things that we can do to remember that God is the one we need to ask for help? Now, if you don't know those answers to those last questions, remember you can go and ask someone for help, just like we can ask God for help. Now, this week, we can look for ways to remind us that we can worship by asking for God's help. All right, my dears, we are working on Psalm 139, verse 14, and it says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Psalm 139, 14, and it says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Okay, ready? I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Ready? Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. We're going to practice emotions to the second part next week, okay? This is a longer verse. We're going to take it a little slow this month. But we can practice the words again. I will say it, then you can say it. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. That might be a little surprise for the next set of emotions. All right, my dears, will you please join me in a word of prayer as we close? Heavenly Father, I know that we will face challenges in this life that will make us feel hopeless. But help us to remember that we can have hope and that we can worship you by asking for your help in the difficult and the hard times. In the easy and wonderful times, Lord, no matter what, you are our very best guide. You are our very best friend, and you are the very best in just everything, Lord. I thank you for the reminders through your creation that we can worship you, Lord, and through this memory verse that we have, that we are made wonderfully from you, Heavenly Father. I ask that you help to guide us, and you help us in our worship this month, that our focus turns to you always and forever. In your holy and precious name I pray. Amen. Okay, my dears, don't forget we are still memorizing Psalm 139:14, and I will see you next week.